The Golden Palace and the Forgotten Man. Imagine a mansion so large that its echo took a second to return. Chandeliers brighter than the sun, marble floors that reflected dreams, and golden doors guarded by silence. Inside this palace lived Mr. Edward Kane, a billionaire whose name could move markets. People called him a genius, a visionary. But behind the polite smiles, everyone whispered another truth. He had forgotten what kindness felt like. Every morning, the staff stood straight as soldiers. No one dared to speak unless spoken to. Among them was Samuel, the old janitor, quiet, humble, and invisible. For 30 years, Samuel had cleaned the same halls, polished the same golden handles, and smiled through every insult. One morning, as the rain fell softly outside, Edward walked into the grand hall and stopped. A bucket of soapy water stood near the stairs, and Samuel was mopping. Edward frowned. "Still here, old man?" he said coldly. "You've been cleaning this place since I was a boy. Don't you ever get tired of being small?" Samuel simply bowed his head. "Sir, someone has to keep your floors shining." The billionaire turned away with disgust. He saw weakness, not dedication. That morning, something in him decided it was time to remove what didn't fit his perfection. He told his assistant, "By tonight, the janitor is gone. I want this place spotless, but without him." Samuel heard the whisper, but said nothing. He only looked up at the ceiling, at the cracks in the paint, and smiled sadly. He had nowhere to go, but his heart was clean, even if the world didn't see it.
The visit that changed everything. That evening, the Golden Gates opened for someone special. A charity group had been invited, children from a nearby orphanage, visiting the mansion for a small event. Edward had agreed only for publicity. He didn't care about children, he cared about cameras. Among those children was a little girl named Amara, 7 years old, bright eyes, skin like warm chocolate, and a voice soft as a song. She didn't know she was stepping into a house of pride. She just looked around with wonder, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. As she wandered near the kitchen, she saw Samuel cleaning a corner. His hands trembled from age, but his eyes were kind. "Hello, mister," she said cheerfully. "Why are you cleaning all alone?" Samuel chuckled. "Because this house doesn't clean itself, little one." She laughed, her giggle echoing down the hall. For the first time that day, the old man smiled, not out of habit, but warmth. He gave her a small candy from his pocket. "It's not gold," he said, "but it's sweet." When Edward walked in, his face darkened. "What's this?" he barked. "You're chatting with guests now? You think this is a playground?" Samuel bowed his head quickly. "I'm sorry, sir." But Amara frowned at Edward. "Why are you shouting at him? He's nice." The billionaire froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that, especially not a child. He forced a laugh. "Little girl, you don't understand. He's just the janitor." Her eyes widened. He's working. That's important." Edward rolled his eyes. "Important? He scrubs floors." Amara looked up at him, then at the shiny floor below. Her next words would stop the entire room. But not yet. That moment, the moment she broke him, was still waiting to happen. The 4 words that silenced a billionaire. The grand hall grew still. The billionaire's laughter echoed coldly against the marble. Amara stood there, clutching her teddy bear, her small eyes glimmering with confusion, and something deeper, disappointment. Edward Kane, the man whose name shined on skyscrapers, towered above her like a mountain of pride. "Little one," he said with forced patience, "this man doesn't belong in the same room as you. He's a janitor. His job is to stay invisible." The old janitor tried to calm the moment. "It's all right, miss. Some people just see the world differently." But Amara didn't back down. She looked straight at Edward, the way only a child who knows truth can. "My mama says," she began softly, "the world is full of people who forget who cleaned their mess when they became rich." Edward blinked. The staff froze. Even Samuel looked up, startled. "What did you say?" Edward asked, frowning. Amara took a step closer, her tiny shoes tapping the marble. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never left his. "He cleans your home," she said, "and you don't even see him." Edward chuckled bitterly. "See him? I pay him." That's when she said it. the 4 words that would echo in Edward's soul for the rest of his life. She whispered, "You forgot to care." Those words, small, simple, but sharp, pierced through the golden armor he had built around his heart. For the first time in years, Edward couldn't speak. His lips parted, but no words came. The room felt heavier, the lights dimmer. Amara tilted her head. "My mama cleaned houses too," she said quietly. "People like you never said thank you. But she told me, if your heart forgets kindness, all your gold turns to dust." The billionaire's face twitched. He looked down at the spotless marble beneath his feet. Floors Samuel had cleaned for decades. He saw his reflection there, not as a powerful man, but as a lonely one. Before he could react, the orphanage caretaker hurried over. "Amara, dear, don't trouble the gentleman." Amara looked up at her and whispered, "But he's the one in trouble." And then she walked away, her small hand dragging the old teddy bear along the shining floor that Samuel had polished with tired, grateful hands. Edward stood motionless. The echo of her 4 words, "You forgot to care," played in his mind like a haunting melody. He turned toward Samuel. For the first time in his life, he noticed the man's cracked hands, his slow breath, the quiet dignity in his bowed posture. Edward wanted to say something, an apology maybe, but pride sealed his lips. As Samuel walked away, Edward suddenly felt something unfamiliar: shame. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and real. He turned toward the giant mirror on the wall. His reflection smiled back, but he couldn't recognize the man anymore. That night, the billionaire sat alone in his study. The mansion was silent. No laughter, no footsteps, just the sound of rain tapping the glass. He poured himself a drink, but it didn't taste the same. He kept hearing her words again and again. "You forgot to care." And for the first time, Edward Kane, the man who could buy everything, realized he had lost something priceless: his humanity. The past he tried to bury. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He sat by the massive window of his golden study, watching the rain carve rivers down the glass. The mansion felt emptier than ever. Every tick of the clock echoed louder than his heartbeat. He poured himself another drink, but his hand trembled. "You forgot to care." The words echoed again, softer this time, like a whisper from his conscience. He looked down at the framed photos on his desk. Corporate awards, luxury yachts, celebrity parties. All faces smiling, none real. But behind those, half hidden under dust, was a small old photograph. He pulled it out. It was faded, creased from time. A boy, barefoot, smiling, standing beside a woman in a janitor's uniform, her arms wrapped around him with pride. His mother. Edward's chest tightened. He hadn't looked at that photo in over 30 years. His mother had cleaned houses her whole life. He remembered her worn-out shoes, her cracked hands that smelled like soap, and her soft voice saying, "Son, no work is small if it's done with love." He closed his eyes and saw it again. Her cleaning a hotel floor while he waited outside, embarrassed that his classmates might see her. He'd sworn he would become rich enough never to smell cleaning chemicals again. He kept that promise, but at the cost of forgetting her. A tear slid down his cheek, and the first in decades. He whispered to the photo, "Mama, I forgot to care." Just then, he heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Samuel, carrying his old mop and bucket. The old man was finishing his last night of work before being dismissed. Edward opened the door. "Samuel?" The janitor stopped, surprised. "Sir?" Edward hesitated. "Did you ever have children?" Samuel nodded slowly. "I had a daughter once. She passed away young. But I still thank God for every memory." Something in Edward's chest broke open. He saw in Samuel the same quiet strength his mother had, humble, invisible, yet unshakably dignified. He looked at Samuel's hands, the same hands that had cleaned his messes for years without complaint. For a moment, Edward couldn't meet his eyes. "I treated you unfairly," he said. The words felt heavy but freeing. Samuel smiled gently. "Sir, forgiveness is lighter to carry than anger. You don't owe me words, only change." Edward froze. It was as if everyone around him, his mother, the little girl, the janitor, had been sent to teach him the same forgotten lesson. When Samuel left that night, Edward stood in the empty hallway, surrounded by gold, yet feeling poorer than ever. He went to the grand staircase and sat down, something he'd never done before. The marble was cold beneath him, but it felt real. He thought of Amara's innocent face, Samuel's kindness, his mother's tired hands, and finally understood what his billions had cost him. Not money, not fame, but heart. The search for Amara. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting the mansion in soft gold. But for Edward Kane, everything looked different. For the first time, he noticed the dust on the windowsills, the quiet sigh of the workers, the faint smell of cleaning soap. He realized that his palace wasn't shining because of gold. It was shining because of people like Samuel. Edward moved quickly. He called his assistant. Find the orphanage that visited yesterday. The little girl, Amara. I need to speak with her. The assistant blinked. Sir, the child? From the charity event? Yes, Edward replied firmly. Her words matter more than my investors. Within hours, his black car pulled up outside a small brick orphanage on the edge of town. The building was old, the paint peeling, the gate half broken. Children played in the yard, their laughter mixing with the smell of baked bread. It felt alive. Edward stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. The caretaker gasped when she saw him. Mr. Kane? What brings you here? He smiled weakly. A lesson, and maybe a little forgiveness. Amara was sitting under a tree, drawing on a torn notebook with a broken crayon. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened. Not in fear, but curiosity. You came, she said softly. Edward knelt beside her, something he hadn't done for anyone in years. I did, he said. You told me something yesterday, and I haven't stopped hearing it. She looked at him with a small, knowing smile. You mean when I said you forgot to care? He nodded, eyes misty. Yes, and I want to learn how to remember again. Amara tilted her head. Then start where you left off. He frowned gently. What do you mean? She pointed at his hands. They're clean, but they don't help. My mama used to say, hands are made to lift others, not just to hold money. Her words struck deeper than any boardroom insult or business loss ever had. Edward felt something break, not in pain, but in release. He took a deep breath. Amara, I fired Samuel, the janitor you met, but I want to make things right. I want to thank him, properly. Amara grinned. Then go tell him. Don't wait. People like him don't need your money, they need your heart. Edward smiled sadly. You sound just like my mother. Amara's face lit up. Then she must have been kind too. He looked away, his throat tightening. She was a cleaner, just like Samuel. I was ashamed once. Now I'm ashamed that I ever forgot her. Amara stood holding her teddy bear out toward him. Then take this. It's not new, but it's full of love. Maybe it'll remind you. Edward hesitated, a billionaire being handed a broken toy. But he accepted it with trembling hands. Thank you, he whispered. As he stood to leave, the caretaker approached. Mr. Kane, she has that effect on people. That little girl brings light wherever she goes. Edward turned one last time to see Amara waving goodbye. And for the first time in decades, he waved back. Not as a rich man, but as a human being. When he stepped into his car, he looked at the teddy bear on the seat beside him. It was old, patched, and missing an ear. Yet somehow, it was the most valuable thing he owned. He smiled softly and whispered to himself, It's time to care. And with that, Edward Kane drove back toward the mansion, not to his empire, but to make peace with the man he'd ignored for too long, the heart that finally remembered. When Edward returned to the mansion, the air felt different. It wasn't the same cold palace of gold and silence. It was now a place where truth had entered. The billionaire who once walked like a king now walked like a man searching for forgiveness. He found Samuel in the back hallway, quietly packing his mop and old rags into a worn-out bag. The janitor looked up, startled. Sir, I thought I was... Edward interrupted softly. You're not fired. Samuel blinked, confused. But sir, your assistant said... I was wrong, Edward said firmly. I forgot what really keeps this place shining. It's not gold, it's you. Samuel stared at him for a moment, Unsure if he was hearing right, Edward stepped closer, his voice trembling. "You've worked here longer than I've lived in this house. You've seen it all, and you've never asked for anything. I owe you more than money could repay." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small teddy bear Amara had given him. "A little girl reminded me what my mother once taught me. No work is small when done with love, and no man is big enough to look down on another." For the first time in his life, Edward Kane bowed to a janitor. Samuel's eyes widened. His lips trembled and tears welled up behind his old glasses. "Sir, please, you don't have to." But Edward smiled through his own tears. "I do, because I forgot to care." The silence that followed was sacred. It was the kind of silence that heals. Over the next few weeks, everything began to change. Edward gave Samuel a permanent home inside the mansion, not as a worker, but as family. He doubled the staff's wages and created scholarships for children of workers, all in the name of his late mother. But there was one more thing he had to do. He invited the orphanage back, every child, every caretaker, and threw a grand event. But this time, there were no cameras, no press, no fake smiles, just laughter, music, and warmth. When Amara arrived, she ran up to him. "You look happier," she said. He knelt down and smiled. "Because someone small taught me something big." She giggled. "Was it me?" He nodded. "Yes, you said 4 words that changed my life." Amara grinned proudly. "You mean you forgot to care?" Edward laughed softly. "Exactly, but now I remember." He took her tiny hand and led her to a new plaque placed on the mansion wall. It read, "In honor of those who clean the world's dust while keeping their hearts spotless. Edward Kane and Amara Foundation." Tears shimmered in the little girl's eyes. She looked up at him and whispered, "My mama would be happy." Edward smiled, his voice breaking. "So would mine." As the evening light filled the golden hall, the same chandeliers that once symbolized pride now reflected something purer, kindness. And in that glow, for the first time in decades, Edward Kane felt truly rich, not because of the mansion or his fortune, but because a little girl had reminded him that the most powerful thing in the world isn't money, control, or fame. It's care. Moral of the story: no act of kindness is ever wasted. The world remembers those who care, not for what they have, but for who they are.